Hey, beautiful soul. You're listening to the Rising into Mindful Motherhood podcast, your weekly dose of fertility wisdom. I'm your host, Dr. Katie Wood. I'm a barefoot mama bear, pharmacist, and integrative fertility coach. This is your go-to podcast for all things to naturally nourish your fertility, embody womb healing, and reclaim your feminine power to accelerate your path to pregnancy. My expert guests and I will be having intentional conversations to discuss the many facets of a thriving, fertile foundation, natural wellness, and how we grow and transform as women on our journey to motherhood. So let's dive in, shall we? Hello and welcome to Rising into Mindful Motherhood. In this episode, I'll be talking with Patty Castellanos. She is a mother of two, licensed therapist, hypnotherapist, and mom wellness coach. She helps women to be greater than their story through releasing past traumas, fears, negative thoughts, and beliefs that are no longer helping you live the life that you want to live. And really by learning to set boundaries, increasing self-love and self-compassion, and choosing to prioritize yourself to truly live a life that you love and that is aligned to you. So in this episode, we'll be diving into fertility. And I feel like this is a topic that is never touched upon, but the fear of parenting itself, the fear of potentially being pregnant in your changing body, the fear of birth, or potentially birth trauma, or having your struggles to conceive with your first and beyond showing up and impacting your future conceptions and expanding your family. So welcome, Patty. I'm so excited to have you on the podcast today. And I'd really love to dive in and just learn how hypnotherapy found its place in your work and how you support your clients.
Absolutely. And thank you, first of all, so much for having me on your podcast to be able to share more about this, because you're right. This is not a topic that a lot of people talk about. And very often it is lurking in the subconscious mind, dealing with the things that you're not even aware of. So, how did hypnotherapy find its way into the work that I do? Well, that actually goes back to the story of my first child. You see, I read What to Expect When You're Expecting. I mean, doesn't everybody? And I followed my doctor's directions. I did what I thought I was supposed to do. And the day that labor began, I went to the hospital. The nurse then said, "Oh, honey, you don't need to feel pain, right?" And I go, "Well, I guess not." So once again, I followed the directions. I ended up with an epidural basically as soon as I walked into that hospital room, that then landed me in a bed, switching sides, talking a lot with the friends and family that I had visiting during my labor. And then just a few hours later, my doctor came through the door, tapped on his watch, and said, "All right, I guess we're done. You haven't progressed past a 4. Time to roll you back for a C-section." And I was left there very confused, completely unsure about what had happened. I thought I did what I was supposed to do, went back, had my C-section, met my incredible firstborn. But then after that, recovery was hard. I felt like I didn't even know what was going on in that postpartum period. I really wanted to breastfeed, and breastfeeding was tough. And when I started learning more, because as a licensed therapist, that's what I do. I dig into my story. I figure out what it is that I'm feeling. And when I started learning more about the mind, the body, and its connection to birth, that's when I learned about all of the feelings that come up after birth and how its subconscious impact creates what we feel in our body. So, therefore, when I started learning about what I could do different or how I could heal, That's when I then became certified as a hypnotherapist. Hypnotherapy really was that technique that helped me to not only process my own experience, but also led me to recognize that therapeutically, it is so helpful in transforming not only pregnancy and birth, but also fertility experiences.
Hmm. Absolutely. And to hear about your story, it really infuriates me to my core that it didn't seem like you were given informed consent. And two, that the doctors, you didn't progress fast enough. Well, I mean, giving an epidural, potentially if they gave you Pitocin, I don't know if that was something that happened, but all of these things can really change the trajectory of our natural progression of birth. So not allowing mom and baby to really progress at your own pace, I can only imagine that there was some underlying trauma and maybe even resentment from that experience that you had, because it sounded like you went into it with all of the best intentions, right? You thought that you had educated yourself to a certain level. And then I feel like to me, that story almost sounds like they set you up for quote unquote failure, right? That's everyone's own perspective. Some women go into birth wanting to have an epidural, but you trusted them, right? It sounded like you had wholeheartedly trusted them with your first experience to birthing your child.
Oh my gosh, so many of the things that you just said resonate so deeply with me. Informed consent, trusting your provider, and really having them be a partner in your experience. All of those things are so important. One of the things that I learned is that not every provider is interested in having a collaborative experience with their patients. And not every one of them is going to have the same number of hours that they are, quote unquote, willing to allow a patient to labor. And that arbitrary number is very difficult for some people to recognize that it's not about them. Instead, it's about the provider's rules. So, one of the important things to recognize is that having the right provider for you is really going to make such an incredible difference in not only the way that you communicate in pregnancy, the way that you feel in birth, but also the way that you actually communicate with your provider for the conception and fertility journey that you might be on, right? Because here's the thing. Sometimes a provider can be absolutely fantastic, but not the right provider for you. And when you feel that you and your provider are collaborating for your goals, then everything changes. Because for my second birth, that's when I learned all about, as you stated, informed consent, that collaboration, that trust, that provider that supports, recognizes, and truly is a team in helping with your goals. You see, for my second, I decided to go for a vaginal birth after cesarean. I researched providers, I researched evidence based practices. I took a hypnobirthing class, and it absolutely made a profound difference when I learned about the mind and body connection and how it works in birth. I was able to get a supportive doula that worked together with my birth team, and I worked together to truly impact my birth experience in a significantly different way. And here's the thing that a lot of people don't understand. Just taking any birth class or just reading any book is not truly preparing yourself. Why? Because you see, with my first, as I stated, I read the book, What to Expect When You're Expecting, and I took the hospital birth class. Guess what? That's not enough. That is going to prepare you to understand what it is that they expect from you. But what are really your birth goals? What are really the things that you want to feel in your birth? And you just touched a little bit on birth trauma. Birth trauma is so important. Why? Because more people may experience birth trauma than we really understand. Why? Because the way that you feel in birth impacts the long-term effects of that experience. And you see, some people might have to take, let's say, Pitocin in order to assist in progression. Some people might benefit from a cesarean section, but when they receive the conversation, when they receive informed consent, when they feel that their concerns and their desires were taken into consideration, the feeling that they have when those procedures take place is vastly different than when they feel that those procedures were done to them without them being an active participant. So, yes, I absolutely agree with you that so many of the things that a mother experiences in pregnancy, labor and delivery, and even in postpartum affect her motherhood journey and how she feels moving through that story.
Mhm. And what really stood out to me when you were talking about your second birth experience was that you stepped back into your power and you claimed the birth that you wanted, that you envisioned for yourself. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure there's some people listening to this or people that you know who did that. And their birth still maybe wavered from what they envisioned. And exactly like you said, it's really how things are positioned and how you understand the choices that are laid in front of you. And I think when you have that solid foundation of maybe you want a natural childbirth, but you understand the potential necessity of a C-section, right? Those are two very different things, but you can hold the duality of both. And that is where I 1,000% agree with you. I'm sorry, the majority of probably birth books or birth courses are not going to fully prepare you for birth. I do have a couple that I highly recommend. I'll link them below. They're on my website. One that I took myself to prepare for my birth, and then also another one that I learned close friends that I also had on the podcast. But I feel for both of those birth courses, they are actually educating you on all of the things that could be presented in front of you, the cascade of interventions, and not one is right over the other. It's just purely education, purely empowerment, and you can decide what feels right to you, right? A lot of my girlfriends from home or from college, they felt comfortable in a hospital. They wanted an epidural, whatever, and that's what felt good to them. I love that. I felt safe at home. The idea of having a birth in a hospital felt very constricting to me, and that was great for me, right? There's not one right answer over the other, but I really want to dive into, and you briefly touched upon this, for me and always, I always think that stepping into this power and this way of conviction and confidence in yourself in the fertility phase is going to set you up for feeling like a badass mama bear. Nothing can get in your way, right? Even if it's a challenge or something that isn't in your ideal birth plan or parenting plan, you're going to be able to navigate it with strength and ease. And it's just going to be, this is what it is. This is what feels good in my mama body for my future child, my child that's on this earth right now, whatever it may be. So let's dive in. So fear of being a parent, fear of giving birth, and all of these things. And maybe even I've had some clients who are fearful changing body because a lot of us maybe grew up in the 90s who are in my sphere right now, and we grew up with what, fear of fat and lots of dietary restrictions, and let's follow this 3-day Kellogg's diet or the keto diet or the Atkins diet. And so fear of your body changing, fear of giving birth, that was a big one for me, because I feel like movies and shows and society makes birth seem really scary. And then I've also had clients, and I know I'm bunching this all together, but I've also had clients who were fearful of being parents themselves because maybe they had a traumatic childhood and they don't want to repeat that pattern, or they're just afraid that they wouldn't be a good parent. So I can't wait to just hear anything you have to share on all of that.
So many different areas that you touched on. But absolutely, the 7-day Kellogg's diet, the Britney Spears low-rise jeans, and the fact that we had certain expectations of what was acceptable and what was not. And realistically speaking, so often the expectations that we hold for ourselves based on what society is putting out there for us, or maybe it's the expectations from our parents or siblings or friends. Those are the things that are creating the belief systems that we hold for ourselves, the thought patterns that we are carrying around with us that create the kinds of things that we do moving forward. Here's the thing though, not always are those beliefs that we hold for ourselves actually helpful for conceiving a baby, helpful for having a family that brings you joy, helpful for having the type of birth experience that you feel good in, right? The belief systems that we hold for ourselves, when they are not truly ours, then instead can bring up fear, anxiety, stress, resentment, overwhelm, and a variety of other different experiences. And those kinds of feelings then impact our hormones. We can have an increase in cortisol levels. That can mess with our estrogen and our progesterone. Our cycles can go completely out of whack, meaning that our ovulation is affected. When our cycles are affected, then our mood is affected. Our connection with others is affected. So therefore, there are so many different things that can happen when our belief systems are not truly in accordance with the kind of life that we want to live for ourselves. And unfortunately, as you mentioned about the movies, the things that we hear about birth, the stories that our aunt or our mother or our mother-in-law share with us, that is not necessarily what your story is going to be. One of the important things to recognize is that we get to choose the kinds of stories that we allow for ourselves and the ones that we choose to accept as somebody else's. And our subconscious mind doesn't know the difference. It just takes everything in and it files it away. And it's up to us to then really give it the power and the worth that it deserves in our life, or allow it to move away. Now, one of the things that you mentioned earlier was talking about plans, birth plans, family plans, parenting plans. It almost feels as if our generation, the generation that grew up in the 90s, everything's a plan. I'm going to plan to go to college. I'm going to plan to have a career. I'm going to plan to have a family. I'm going to plan to have the kind of birth that I want, how I want it. Unfortunately, plans tend to be very strict, and plans leave very little room for flexibility. And one of the beautiful things about conception, pregnancy, birth, and motherhood is that we get to allow the flexibility and the flow of what we choose to allow and what we recognize doesn't quite work well for us. And well, that is a really incredible thing because too many people feel that the plans that they create for themselves have to be it. So instead, I love to tell people, let's look at it in terms of preferences. Why? Because take a look at plan and preference. They have very different connotations while still giving room for the same type of thing. Now, if we look at preferences, we can then consider I would really like to have a hospital birth, but I don't want it to really look like the kinds of hospital birth that people talk about all the time. So, what if I brought in aspects of a home birth into a hospital? Perhaps bringing in LED lights, soft music, maybe my very own pillow, bring in a supportive doula, or even educate my partner in ways to have, let's say, aromatherapy or comfort measures so that I feel more homey. I've had people bring in pictures of their pets and put them by the side table. And it's about creating the place and the space that is right for you. In terms of a cesarean section, maybe that is what is right for somebody. But instead, what if you bring in preferences such as having music that you would love to listen to in the OR? Maybe bringing in a specific aroma that you would really like to have. Perhaps it's about having a clear drop, a clear cloth drop, rather than having the big blue one that seems very disconnecting. What if instead it's your partner sharing the sex of your baby versus the doctor? And I'm sharing these things because it is so important to recognize that you get to create your very own story based on your beliefs, your desires, and your preferences as you eliminate the fear that then blocks the kind of story that you want to have.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And I loved in the beginning how you connected holding on to these stories and patterns can have that downstream effect to your cortisol, your hormones, your mood. And then what really came to my mind when you were saying all that is maybe you don't even feel like having sex with your partner, which is very much required for having a child. And in the least, I imagine most of us want to have an intimate, pleasurable experience to bring our children in, not something that was forced or pressured. So I love that just like downstream effect of living your life in a way that essentially isn't aligned with the life that you want to lead because you're carrying these old stories that, yes, served a purpose when you were younger. They helped with survival, but now you don't need them. It's just like extra weight. We can shed them, whether it's the fear of being a parent or having a child or whatever it is surrounding all of those. And I love how you said, I think it was plan versus preference. And what came to my mind was really setting an intention, It's all about setting an intention, but being open to receiving it how you're meant to receive it. And that is so big in terms of conceiving your baby. I'm sure any loyal listeners have heard me say this 1,000 times, but in case you haven't, my husband and I started trying in November. I literally thought we would be announcing to my family come Christmas that we were pregnant in 1 month, in one cycle. So I think it's okay to set that intention. That's what I desire, but being open and not putting that pressure of the outcome happening in that way. But hey, it would be so cool if I could announce it at Christmas. But if not, that's okay. I will get pregnant when and how I am meant to with my baby. So everything that you said was just really beautiful. And I think I would love to dive a little bit deeper for anyone who's listening that maybe had a traumatic childhood in one way, shape, or form, and they don't want to repeat that pattern, because I've seen that come up a few times and it really breaks my heart. And I like to encourage people that the patterns can stop with you. But as you and I know, these limiting beliefs and these fears and these stories can really hold us back. So any words of wisdom that you have for anyone who's maybe dealing with that, or maybe even if it's not that specific topic, but can be relevant to it, yeah, I would love to hear what you have to say about that.
Absolutely. You see, a traumatic childhood, many people think about as something really big, right? But here's the thing, it could be something very small that stuck with you. And that one thing, let's just say that you grew up and your parent kept telling you how difficult parenting was, how hard it was to parent, and how much it was really stressful on them. And you kept hearing that story over and over. And perhaps you had the most incredible upbringing ever, and you felt that you lacked for nothing. But within you, you continue to have this belief system that parenting was hard, parenting was difficult. And so, as you continue to move through your adulthood journey, you then are faced with the fact that parenting is hard. And as you then desire to start a family with your partner, you might find yourself trying to figure out how to have sex and how to get intimate and how to actually do it. And all of a sudden, it's hard. Or you might start tracking your cycle and all of a sudden, it's hard. Or your cycle might be off and all of a sudden, it's hard. So then everything about the conception journey is hard. So, what is that telling you? That is just reinforcing the belief system that little child you heard that parenting was hard. So, instead, giving yourself permission to recognize that the little girl had her experience, and her experience is not your experience as an adult. You see, you get to choose what this experience might look like, because the experience that you heard as a child, that was your mom's experience. And what she was dealing with at the time doesn't have to be yours. You see, the resources that we have available now, the choices that we have available to us, and the changes that we can make can vastly change what we do going forward. So, therefore, when then you decide to become intimate with your husband and you decide to start a family, what does it look like for it to be easy, to be fun, to be enjoyable? And as you set the intention for what you'd rather experience instead, what does that feel like? What does it feel like to have something be enjoyable, fun, free, as you let go of what it was that didn't even belong to you in the first place? And there is a very real reality that some people do have a difficult time getting pregnant. And 1 month comes around, and oh, maybe next month, or the next time comes around, and oh, this wasn't the right month. And then sometimes a few months go by, and then that reinforces whatever it was that they were feeling at the time. And sometimes that feeling can bring up anxiety, stress, and all of those feelings then affect the way our hormones function, creating that feeling of disconnection from your husband, from the experience, and from the intimacy. So, one of the things that I really love to share is give yourself permission to grieve that moment. Acknowledge what you feel. Give yourself permission to recognize that you really wanted to get pregnant right now, and it can absolutely still happen. So, what do you need to change? What do you need to do? Perhaps take some time to connect with your body, connect with your baby, connect with your husband, connect with your desire. Perhaps are there changes that you might need to make to reduce your stress levels? Maybe to bring in more joy. Is there something that nutritionally you would benefit from adjusting? Is there anything in your lifestyle that would help as well? So, therefore, these stories from the past, the traumatic experiences, the traumatic stories, the traumatic belief systems that you were holding on to, you can begin to release simply because they no longer serve the person that you are today.
That's beautiful. And like the way you're describing that, I feel like it really emanates how I encourage my clients to be. And it's allowing for that pause to connect back essentially to your intuition with your partner, with yourself, with your child. And it's so easy to become disconnected from yourself and your partner and your baby on this journey. Believe me, I've been down it. And it's so easy to be on that road and to let things validate it and almost make that gray cloud over you stronger. Or like you keep referring to, and I 100% agree with you, you can decide. You can choose and go from there. It's not always going to be easy. It's not going to be a one and done. It's a daily choice that you get to make. And maybe one day it's hard. It's hard to choose. But that next day, you get to decide again. So I absolutely love everything that you've been saying. And I think you can apply it to so many different facets. And the example that you gave is definitely one that I've heard a lot where maybe someone's parent was struggling, they were doing the best that they could, but they made parenting seem like it was such a hard thing, but it doesn't have to be your story, whatever your story looked like growing up. And I know that you have a beautiful freebie for the audience, a fear release for conception, hypnosis audio. I'd love to have you share about that, and then also where the listeners can find you, connect with you, and just be able to be in your energy and your vibe as well.
Absolutely. And one of the things that I love is that we get to support people on this journey. And it is certainly not in any way, shape, or form something perfect, right? This journey of motherhood, conception, pregnancy, and birth is not perfect. And we get to apply self compassion into this journey so that we can make it our very own. So therefore, I would love to be able to connect with any of the listeners on the expressioncenter.com. On the expressioncenter.com, they can absolutely connect with me there, learn more about my services for hypnosis, therapy, and coaching in fertility, pregnancy, birth, and parenting. And anybody who would like to contact me at Patty at theexpressioncenter.com and mentions this podcast, I would love to share with them a free hypnosis audio to support their journey in conception.
Amazing. Thanks so much, Patty. It's been a really fun conversation. I feel like you and I are very aligned in how we support our people and really just achieving an aligned life that they envision for themselves. So thank you so much for being here.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. And I agree. You and I could probably do another 2 or 3 episodes on this. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for tuning in to the Rising into Mindful Motherhood podcast. If this episode resonated with you or gave you an aha moment, stop what you're doing right now and write a review. This simple act of kindness helps me get this podcast out to connect with as many women as I possibly can. I also have a special offer. If you send me a screenshot of your review, I will take $250 off one of my premium coaching containers. Let me know what resonated with you the most and why. So connect with me in my free Facebook community or tag me on Instagram. You'll find both listed below. Thanks again from the bottom of my heart for tuning in to this episode, and I'll see you next time.